All right, so I wanted to turn it over to Dave, and before I do, Dave, I'll give you the chance to do a more a better intro. But I just wanted to kind of share. I met Dave just a little over 3 years ago. Over in on Bigger Pockets, we were looking at purchasing a property. We were in contract actually on the property in Florida in September of 2017. Right, and after we went into contract, Hurricane Irma was going to be hitting Florida. So I put up a question about. I was concerned, what's going to happen. Maybe this will be big. In Tampa. Tampa usually doesn't get hit by hurricanes, and so Dave was one of the people that jumped in. And it's small things. It's a small thing, seemingly, but kind of thinking back, you were instrumental, kind of helping to ease my concerns. And that property has been doing great. We turned it into a furnished rental, and now it's like a long-term furnished rental. So I don't think I ever said thank you to you for that. So big thanks for being active on the forums. I know you're pretty active there. Um, so that's how I met Dave, and we met once or twice in Florida in person. So it's good to see you, and want to turn it over to you and go ahead and start off, do a quick intro, and tell us about 1031 exchanges.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sergey. Yeah, I was hoping you would explain a little bit of the background because I want everybody to know that Sergey and I met in the Bay. Now, I know some of you think that the Bay is where you live, but it's really here in Tampa Bay, where every day now we have to choose whether we're going to wear our Stanley Cup jacket or our Super Bowl jacket or our World Series championship jacket. Life's pretty good here in Florida, I got to tell you. Now, it's awesome to be here, Sergey. Thank you for asking me to come over. I'm excited to talk to you guys about 1031 exchanges, and not just because I sell them and work with people who do them. By the way, Sergey, I need to get in and do a screen share if we can. I've got a presentation.
Yeah, give me a second. Let me
got it.
Give you the
but
rights.
Also because I do these things for myself. And that is how I have built my portfolio, and actually how I got my start over 20 years ago in Denver, Colorado. And we turned a series of 1031 exchanges over the course of 10 years into a 53-foot sailboat that we paid for with tax-free real estate dollars and lived with our family for 10 years. So I know these things work because I've used them myself. And I love helping others find ways where they can maximize. And just in your little bios, I heard so many little tickling things of how you might be able to use it. Ronnie, with your house hacks, Francis, with what you're doing with forced equity. There's so much that's out there. And I think probably the best way to do that is I've got my assistant standing by the chat list. But let's put questions over there. I'll try to blaze through this presentation, which I think is going to answer most questions and probably cause a whole bunch of others. And then we'll spend some time dealing with those kind of on a one-off basis. Does that sound good? Everybody said, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so 1031 exchanges. I want to start out by talking to you about the two different parts of the tax code that speak to real estate taxation. The first one is section 121, which is your primary residence. Now, most people know about this. Your primary residence, if you've lived in a property for 2 out of the last 5 years, then you can sell it. And if you're single, you get to take the first $250,000. If you're married, it's $500,000 in profit, tax-free. Now, why is that cool? Because it's tax-free, but it deals with your primary residence. So, Ronnie, you're going to be my poster child tonight, okay? What Ronnie's living in right now is a property that's 50% his primary residence. So when he sells that property after living in it for 2 out of 5, he's going to get to take 50% of the profit, tax-free, up to $250,000 or 500,000, depending on if he's married or not. Okay, now it's tax-free. It's your primary residence. You can do it once every 2 years. Awesome, awesome investment strategy by itself. But here's where the shoe falls on the rest of real estate. And that is Section 1031, which deals specifically with business or investment real estate. With the 1031 exchange, when you sell investment real estate, you get to indefinitely, and I emphasize the word indefinitely, defer payment of the tax that normally you would pay on sale. It's only deferred. Yes, I get that, but hang with me because I use some strategies at the end on how to eliminate it completely. But it is only deferred, and it is for investment real estate. So right there, the two main parts of the tax code that are going to let you avoid tax on real estate sales transactions. Now, the 1031 exchange, where we're going to spend the greatest amount of our time, has got 6 basic requirements. All 6 of these must be met in order for the 1031 to be valid. This is why everybody thinks they are so complicated, because there's a whole bunch of tentacles and things that you've got to watch out for. But we're going to talk through them real quickly tonight, and I think you'll kind of see maybe how they're a little more manageable than you might be worried about. But there is a requirement for what type of property qualifies. There's a couple timing requirements. There's requirements to use this person called the qualified intermediary to help you through the 1031. There's some requirements on how title must be held. And then lastly, of course, very importantly, how much you have to reinvest, how do you reinvest, and what that looks like. So this is what we're going to spend the next few minutes, is diving into these. The first requirement is, like I said, we're dealing with investment property. Now, this is property that you hold for, as they call it, productive use in trade. Now, that could be a restaurant building where you have your restaurant, a shoe factory where you make shoes. You use the property for your trade, not as in, I'll trade you this for that. That's a key distinction. Productive use in business. All of you who are landlords, you hold property to use in your business, which is being a landlord. And lastly, investment. And this is really just another way of talking about appreciation. I buy a piece of property, even though it may be worth exactly what it's worth today, because in the future, it's going to appreciate and it's going to grow. So I buy property that I use in my business. I buy property that I use to help me make money. I buy property to use because it's going to appreciate. That is investment property that qualifies for 1031. And you want to note that it's the current use of the property that is important. So with the primary residence, all that matters is that you have lived in that property for 2 out of the previous 5 years to qualify for that. For 1031, it is how you are using the property at that moment. And again, Ronnie, coming back to Ronnie's example, if he were to move out, if he's lived in it for 2 years, and he were to move out of the other half, I think it's a duplex, right? Then you could rent that property for up to 3 years. And it would, the half of it would still qualify for the tax-free primary residence sale. Pretty huge deal. But to qualify for 1031, it must be currently used for investment. Another way of saying it, any property that you hold for income, you try to produce income, can be exchanged for any other type of income producing property. This means that the type of property doesn't matter. You can sell residential and purchase commercial. You can sell commercial and buy multifamily. Sell multifamily and buy raw land. As long as you're using it within those parameters for productive use and investment, it qualifies for 1031 treatment. The definition of real estate is actually put out by the states, and we're not going to belabor the point, but certain things like RVs and mobile homes may or may not be real estate, depending on how the state you're in or the municipality is treating it. If you own a lot that has a mobile home on top of it, that mobile home and the lot would generally be considered to be real estate. If you own a mobile home that is on top of a lot you rent, it's probably not real estate, and so not eligible for a 1031 exchange. The way that we know these things is by what the state sends us every year. If we get a tax bill from the county assessor or the property appraiser, tax collector, then it's real estate. If we get a re-registration certificate renewal from the DMV, it's not real estate, it's something else. So there are some quirky things, again, like mobile homes, timeshares, oil, mineral gas resources. In your neck of the woods in the Northwest of you, forest rights can be considered to be real estate. Not the land itself, but the actual rights to harvest the timber may or may not be. So there's some quirky things. Here's the biggest one of all, because I know I heard several people talking about wholesaling and talking about fix and flipping. Property that qualifies for 1031 treatment, remember, is property you intended to hold for productive use. If your intent is to resell it, then it's not going to qualify for 1031 treatment. So in a typical fix and flip play, what do? You buy it, you fix it. The whole time you're thinking to sell it. So that does not qualify for 1031 treatment. Your intent has to be longer term. There is not a statutory holding period, but most people feel good at least a year of hold, although there could be reasons why a hold with less than that might be appropriate. And we'll circle back to that. For you wholesalers out there, you're not going to be able to use a 1031 immediately because you have to be able to sell real estate. And unless you're taking title, what you're selling is a contract and not the real estate. And even if you are taking title, the question's going to be asked, why are you taking title? Are you taking title to hold, or are you taking title in order to resell it? So you kind of see the IRS is really wanting the 1031 investor to have a little longer time horizon that they're using. So, like I said, most people long-term 12 months or more, but it could always be maybe something that's less. One of my favorite clients of all time sold a property last year that he had owned for a month. And he called me up and he said, well, I'd like to sell this and do a 1031. I said, great. How long have you owned it? A month. I said, it's not going to work, partner. Your intent has to be to hold it. He said, well, Dave, in my contract, I had to agree to honor the long-term lease of the tenant that was in there. So it's in my purchase and sales agreement that I had to honor that. Okay, that's some pretty strong evidence that you bought that, but come on, man, really? Why is the tenant leaving after a month? What's going on with that? Why are you selling it and not honoring the lease? I'll never forget his response. He said, Dave, I think it was the bear. I said, what? Yeah, it was the bear that took up residence at the trash can by the house. The tenant was afraid to take the trash out, so she vacated and broke the lease. And of course, my client was going, Dave, I don't know what the heck to do about a bear, so I'm going to sell it, even though my intent was to hold it. And I said, I don't know about you, but I dare the IRS to argue with a bear. So there could be reasons why you would be able to demonstrate your intent, even if the hold wasn't that long. But in general, longer rather than short. It's US property for US property and a couple of territories like the US Virgin Islands, Guam, and American Samoa. You cannot buy in Puerto Rico and sell in Indianapolis. You cannot sell in Tucson and buy in the Dominican Republic. US property for US property. Foreign property for foreign property, but you can't go from outside the US to inside the US or vice versa. Now, rental property is always going to be an investment. And it makes money, doesn't it? You've got rental NOI. Bare land is always going to be considered an investment. And the reason why I mentioned that here is because bare land rarely makes money. But if your intent is to buy it to hold while it appreciates in the path of progress, that's going to be eligible for 1031. I like to throw out examples of Bill and Jane every once in a while. They've got a duplex that they bought. They've rented out to tenants ever since. They want to sell it and go buy a condo at the beach. Now, here's the key. They're going to rent it, but they're also going to use it some themselves. Would that qualify for 1031 exchange? The answer is yes, because there is no restriction on limited personal use. So, as a transitional strategy to put in the back of your minds, the idea of going from purely investment property into a ski condo at Mammoth that you get to use some for personal use, or that Tahoe rental where you're going to use it some probably during the summer because it's darn cold in the winter, but you're going to generate income. You're also going to use it. Is perfectly fine for 1031. So think about how you can transition with things that way. That's why Sergey has a beautiful little vacation rental right here in Florida anytime he wants to come visit. So that's the type of property that qualifies. Now, the 45-day rule is 45 calendar days. It starts with the day of the closing of your sale, because that's what starts the 1031 exchange, is the closing of your sale. You have 45 days to ID your potential replacement properties. Now, during the 45-day period, you can do one of two things. You can either actually close on your replacement property that automatically identifies it, or you can provide a written list of replacement property or properties. Now, the key is that on day 46, that list cannot be changed. You're stuck with what's on it. So you need to work very quickly during that 45-day period to find, identify, and I highly recommend getting your new property under contract. As a matter of fact, it's actually fine to get your new property under contract before your old property closes. You just can't take title to it until after your old property closes. But that can be a great edge. Now, I think we'll get a chance to address this a little bit later as well, but one of the complaints about the 1031 exchanges, Dave, this is a seller's market. I mean, we just heard, gosh, who was it? $100,000 over asking price? That kind of stuff is crazy. Nobody you feel is going to sell you a property contingent upon letting you get your property sold. And I get that. It's probably true. But here's the deal. And I don't know if it came from Yogi Berra or Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, but the phrase is, you will always miss. You'll never hit 100% of the shots you don't take. So is it worth asking? Absolutely. You don't know. There's all kinds of people selling properties for all kinds of reasons, but I do get it that this is a seller's market. Well, guess what? You are a seller also. So why not sell your own property contingent upon finding the new property to purchase? I think you might find a lot of buyers that are willing, if they're willing to pay $100,000 more for a property, I bet you might find that they might be willing to accept an extended closing. So either way you go, the 45 days is going to be your worst enemy. But you just have to work with it. It's got to be in writing. It's got to be specific identification. And here's the deal. If you name fewer than 4 properties, then it doesn't matter how much they're worth. Sell a property for $100,000, name 3 $5 million properties on your list. That's perfectly fine. For those of you who are looking at selling the smaller assets and we're moving into larger multifamily, that's perfect. Keep your list of 4 to 3 or fewer. You can name more than 3 properties, but then their total value can't be more than 200% of what you sold. So sell a $100,000 property, name 4 $50,000 replacements. That's perfectly fine. But you couldn't name 3 $50,000 replacements and 1 $75,000 replacement, because that breaks the 200% rule, unless you actually close on 95% of the value of the list. Clear as mud, right? In general, you're probably going to want to keep your list to 3 or fewer. We can revisit this. I've also got a couple of really strong videos on this concept at our education portal, the 1031investor.com, and they can help you out. Here's the key, though. You're never going to get an individual exception or extension. The wildfires gave us an extension, but that was for a class of taxpayers. Yes, there was an exception for COVID, but that expired last July, and the IRS hasn't given us anything since. So you as an individual are never going to get an exception. It's going to have to be a federally declared disaster that the IRS also agrees with. So you can hope for it, but I wouldn't count on it. Bill and Jay, let's deal with that example of the 200% 3 property rule again. Bill and Jay sell for 100,000. They want to identify 2 or 3, and each one of those is 10 million. Can they do that? You bet. Why? Because they're only naming 3 or fewer. Bill and Jane sell the property for 100 grand. They want to identify 4 replacement properties that are condos selling for 75 each. Is that okay? Trick question. The answer is maybe. Why? Well, 4 properties selling for 75 is a total of 300,000. 300,000 breaks the 200% rule, because 200% of 100,000 is 200,000. So that would be not allowed. But remember that last extension? If you close on 95% of the list, you can still do it. In this case, they would have to close on all 4 properties in order for that to work. Now, concurrently with the 45-day list, you have 180 days from the closing of your own property to close on the purchase of the replacement properties. And it has to be 1 or more of the properties that are on your 45-day list. Again, you're not going to get any individual exceptions or extensions. Now, the 180 days doesn't seem nearly as bad. And that's right, it's not. The 45 days is your kryptonite. That's what you've got to really pay attention to. Now, although there's one little trick, it's not exactly 180 days. If your tax return comes due before your 180 is over, then you must file an extension. That's just something we got to remind you that you've got to remember to do. So if you closed on your old property, say in December of 2020, your 180 days isn't up until in May, but you probably file a tax return in April. So you're going to need to file an extension. And the reason for this is very important. It's because there is no penalty for starting a 1031 and not completing it, because it will always be done before you file your next tax return. So if you're successful and you complete it, then your accountant reports it on that tax return. If you're not successful, you can't find good properties, let your exchange die. And when you file your tax return, it's as if it never happened. You pay the tax, but you were not pressured into buying a subpar property. Because believe me, nobody ever went broke paying tax on profit. It just feels that way. And it's far better to not get a bad deal than it is to get a bad deal and wish that you hadn't, just because you're trying to save some tax. But that's what this is all about. There's no penalty for starting and not completing a 1031 exchange. Rule number 4, the IRS requires that you use the services of an unrelated third party who's going to document the 1031 exchange and hold your proceeds. This person is called the qualified intermediary. They're companies like mine. And that's all that we do. Because remember, we have to be an unrelated third party. So you will use all of your regular vendors in the transaction. The guy who's the broker, was it Francis? Can't remember. I don't think it was Francis. But the guy who's a broker, your agents are going to be used just like normal. Those of you who are becoming realtors, you will help your clients contract on property. You'll use your regular title companies. Everything is just like normal, but there's a third party called the QI that's in the middle. And here's the key. We have to be involved prior to the closing of the sale. Now, sometimes that's not very far prior, and that's okay. We'll deal with emergencies. But if you close the sale and then come back to me the next week, say, Dave, I'd like to do a 1031 exchange. I'll say, great. When's your next sale? Because you can't do it on this one. We have to be involved prior to the closing of the sale. Oh, so important. Now, title requirements, or as I like to call it, the taxpayer requirements, say that whoever the taxpayer is for the old property is whoever must be the taxpayer for the new property. So what's that mean, really? Well, in simple terms, if you're on deed to that property, you're on deed, you're the title holder, but that property is being reported on your tax return. That's who the taxpayer is. And that has to be consistent, because sometimes there are these things called disregarded entities, like single member LLCs that only have one member and don't file their own tax return. That property is still going to be reported on your tax return. So who's the taxpayer? You are. Who's on title? The LLC is. But in this case, the IRS disregards the LLC and says that you and the LLC are the same taxpayer, because whether you're on title or the LLC is on title, it's still reported on the same tax return. We'll probably have some questions that come up about that. We'll deal with those as we come by. Requirement number 6. In order to defer all tax, you've got to do 2 things. First of all all of the cash proceeds have to be reinvested. So that's your net proceeds. That's after the contract price, after closing costs and commissions, and then after the mortgage is paid off. Whatever's left that goes into your 1031 exchange account has to be reinvested in order to defer all tax. If you walk with cash, you pay tax on whatever you walk with. Second part of the rule, you must purchase property or properties that are at least equal to or greater in value than your net sale. Now, a simple way of figuring that is take the cash that goes into your exchange account and add to that any mortgage that was paid off. That equals your reinvestment target. Or if you like to work down a settlement statement, it's the net sales price of the property, the contract price minus closing costs and commissions. Either way, cash plus mortgage payoff or contract price minus closing costs and commissions. That's your net sales price. You've got to purchase at least that much in order to defer all tax. Now, just like with the cash, you can purchase less than you sold, but you'll pay tax on the difference. Now, a lot of people say, but wait a minute, Dave, I put $20,000 down on this property. Can't I get that back? Because that's not taxable. It's not profit. I totally agree with you. But here's the problem. When you do a 1031 exchange, the IRS chooses to say that any dollar you take out is a dollar of profit. So you want to argue it's my original capital. The IRS wants to argue it's profit that you're taking first. Anybody know who wins that and why? I think it has to do something with nuclear weapons. The IRS will always win that argument. So here's our basics. Property that qualifies for 1031 is investment property. You've got the 45 days to identify, the 180 days to complete the purchase. You have to use a qualified intermediary who's going to guide you through the maze. That's what we're there for. You've got the taxpayer or the title requirements, that it has to be the same taxpayer from sale to purchase. And then lastly, if you want to defer all tax, you must purchase equal or up. So jot questions in the chat as we go forward. I want to spend the next 5 or 6 minutes just talking about different ways to use these. And I think that'll stir some more questions. And then we'll go into a short Q&A if that sounds good. Does that work, Sergey?
Yep, it does. And we once we go into the Q&A, we can have people ask questions directly as well for more engagement as we go. Go ahead, David.
Awesome. Sounds good. So one of the very common things is that as people have gathered together big portfolios of smaller properties, they will use consolidation exchange to sell several small properties to buy a larger property. Those of you who talked about getting into multifamily, you could sell several smaller single family homes and use that to purchase a larger multifamily. The key is only that all of those sales the purchase has to fit within the timelines of all of the sales. So it becomes just a timing exercise and challenge to do. Because remember, all that matters is that you purchase at least as much as you sell. It can be one property, it can be multiple properties. Now, the exact opposite of that is a diversification exchange. We buy a small property. Francis, you were doing this. You're my forced equity guy. You're buying properties, you're fixing them up, You're forcing equity. Maybe you're refinancing and then you're buying your next property. That's an awesome model. But part of that could also be you buy it, you fix it up, you rent it, and then once equity is there, in say a year, you sell that property. Maybe you bought it for 200, now it's worth 400. You sell it, and what are you going to buy? Well, you don't feel that good about the rent you get per square foot on a $400,000 house, but you love $200,000 houses. So sell a $400,000 property, go buy two $200,000 properties. Do the exact same thing. Sell them, and now you own four $200,000 properties. Sell those, and you own eight. And then what happens? You wake up one morning tired. So what do? Sell a bunch of those and start to consolidate. And that's the ebb and the flow of the 1031 exchange. You can adjust your portfolio size and you can adjust the size of the properties using the 1031 exchange. Remember that vacation property we talked about? What if ahead of retirement, you started to position your properties to where you want to retire? So that when you retire, your portfolio awaits you wherever you want to retire. Sergey wants to retire in Clearwater. Awesome. He starts to move his rentals to the Tampa Bay area. And then when he finally relocates here, his portfolio is with him. So he's got it close to him. Management's easy. And in between now and then, he's got properties he can visit and use for some personal use. What an awesome strategy there is for that. Now, what about estate planning? Now let me back up. Because why is this so important? Because geography doesn't matter either. So the size of property doesn't matter. The number of properties doesn't matter. The location doesn't matter. The sector doesn't matter. So you could move property because of a desire to go from active to passive management, from single family rentals into triple net commercial. So you can adjust your portfolio in just about every way imaginable using the 1031 exchange. And along the way, you will never pay a penny in tax. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's deal with the estate planning, and then we're going to talk about the 4 Ds of real estate investing. In this example, we're looking at the end game. Mom and dad are going to sell the family farm. Now, the family farm's 2 things, isn't it? It's agricultural land, that's investment. It's also their primary residence. So, all the way back to the beginning of this presentation, they can take the portion that's allocated to their primary residence, and when they sell, that money is tax-free. Put it in your pocket. Go take that first retirement trip to Alaska. Do a 1031 exchange with the agricultural land, so you indefinitely defer the tax. Now, this family bought a property near each one of their children. They told their kids, we'll make a deal with you. You manage it. We'll pay you a fee, but we get the income. And when we die, you get to inherit it. Pretty good deal for the kids, isn't it? What did the parents get out of it? Tax-free dollars from the sale of their primary, indefinitely deferred tax-free dollars from the 1031, motivated management because the kids knew that they were going to get to inherit them. So they wanted to do a good job of managing it. And this is where we talk about the 3 Ds, because there was no tax due. And the 4 Ds, are defer, defer. Let me know if I'm going too fast. Defer, because as long as you own your replacement property, you will never have to pay the deferred tax. As long as any time you sell that property and do a 1031 exchange, you will never pay the tax. You can't hear me well? Let's turn this up a little bit and see how that works. So first defer, as long as anytime you sell the property, you do a 1031 exchange, you'll never pay the tax. That's the 3 Ds of 1031 investing. What's the 4th D? Any guesses? Die. Now, it's not the best way, I grant you that. But here's the deal. If you die owning that real estate, then your heirs get it as if they paid market value for it on the day you died. In other words, if you defer, 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 and then die, the tax does indeed go away. And it becomes a tax-free legacy for your heirs. What's my caution? Don't tell your kids about this too quickly. You don't want them getting ideas. So, a diversification exchange. I can strategize to move these properties however I want. I can convert property from investment into my primary residence, and I'll never pay the tax, because what triggers the tax is the sale of a piece of property. So it's really quite possible to keep this tax deferred forever. There's a review of the 6 basic requirements, and I kind of teased you with some of the strategies. So let's open it up. Do we have some questions from the chat, or does somebody want to just shout? Et voila.
So there, if there are, I know there's quite a good amount of questions in the chat. Usually, it's always good when we can get direct interaction with everyone else here on the call. So maybe we can give first a chance for people to ask questions directly, and then maybe address anything that's in the chat.
Okay.
And you guys can repeat your question if it's in the chat.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for breaking it down. Sorry to budge into my team member.
No, go for
all the transactions you do. Let's assume the 1031 goes away. I don't think it will, but let's assume it just goes away. Does that mean that inventory is going to go down because people are not going to sell anymore, and then the high prices will come down a bit? Or what's your, like, based on the activity you're seeing, what will happen?
Yeah, that's well, you're asking me to put my prognosticator's hat on, the great Karnak. This has been the key to why the 1031 has worked so well for over 100 years, is that it increases the velocity of money. Because instead of having to print money so prices go up and inflation happens, people sell and exchange. If there is pressure put on it because people no longer want to sell, that's going to cause stagnation. It's going to cause lower prices to retreat, certainly. So if you're wanting to exchange up, you're going to be selling less valuable property, trying to buy more valuable property that's less available. And when that happens, there's less velocity. The 1031 exchange has been a huge economic generator. And I think if I tell you why it started, you'll understand. In the 1920s, we were an agricultural nation, and we were just moving into the industrial age. Well, we had tons of farmers who had great land holdings, and they wanted to increase those. But if they sold their properties to either buy more land or to switch to factories and industrialization, they would not be able to do it because they would have to pay the tax. So by itself, without that incentive, we were going to stall the income of the industrial age in America. It's that serious when you look at the billions of dollars. So 1031 was put into place to allow those farmers to buy bigger farms or to transition to industrial holdings without having to pay tax on the profit. So yeah, I don't see it being a good thing at all. What worries me more is the talk about getting rid of the step up in basis. But it's all part of the political wish lists and promises of an incoming administration. And a lot of times, those are worth the paper they're printed on. And I'm not saying that about this particular administration. It's kind of funny. I've been doing this now for over 20 years. I've had Republican and I've had Democratic presidents that I've worked under. Every one of them has threatened to get rid of the 1031 exchange. Red, blue, they've all talked about it. In every case, except one, they never did it because once they see the economic power of the 1031, they let it go because it's not broke and it's working well. Anybody want to hazard a guess who the president was that took away part of 1031? Can anybody guess?
Bush.
It's the one you would never think of. Yeah, our dearly departed President Trump was the only president who took away part of 1031 with his 2018 Tax Act. And this is what the craziest thing is. What he took away was the ability to sell personal property, like 747 airplanes, and exchange them for other 747 airplanes. So President Trump got rid of the part of the code that would have allowed him to sell his own airplane and defer the tax. Go figure. So I don't know. That's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question when I really don't know. But I'll leave you with Rosa, the quote from Gideon Tucker, who was a famous attorney who said, "Just remember that no person's property or liberties are safe while Congress is in session." So keep an eagle eye on it.
With the 1031 exchange and being able to go back and forth between it being your primary and it being an investment, if let's say you hold your property for a while and you end up living in it and then you move out to create another investment, do you still have to do the 12 months or so around there again? Does it reset, or if you were to sell it in 2 months after you moved out, would you be good?
Hey, my man, you are my poster child tonight because I love the House Act for beginning investors, for senior investors, experienced investors. It's just an awesome thing. I have the most understanding wife in the world. I get it. But we figured the other day that we have had roommates helping us pay our mortgages for over 23 of our 32 years of marriage. Now, not everybody's got someone like Vicky, but it's an awesome strategy. So there's a couple things that play into what you're experiencing right now. So first of all, just so everybody understands, what Ronnie owns is 2 pieces of real estate. He owns a piece of real estate that is his primary residence. He owns a piece of real estate that is an investment property because it's duplex, right?
No, mine's a single. I also run a rental that's a duplex, and then I'm doing a flip as well.
Gotcha. Okay, I saw that. Okay, so forget it. I don't like Ronnie anymore. No, I'm just kidding. Let's stay with the duplex because it's easier to understand, and I'll explain how it works for you. So when I own a duplex and I live in half of it, 50% of it's primary residence, 50% of it's investment. Now, let's say I love how that's going. So I move out of that half of the duplex and I turn it into a rental and I go buy something else. Now, 2 years later, I want to sell that duplex. Well, the half that's been investment is easy, right? It's been investment property all along. So I can sell it and I can 1031. The half that was my primary residence, if it's been 2 years, can I still document that I lived in it for 2 out of the 5 years prior to sale? Well, yeah, because I lived in it for 1, lived in it for 2, and then rented for 1 and rented for 2. So in the last 5 years, I lived in it for 2. So without having to move back in, Ronnie, you could take the primary residence exemption. Still tax free. So that's a big deal, right? All you have to do is recapture whatever depreciation happened during those 2 years. Now, since you guys are real close to the other Bay Area, let's talk about something that's happened up there. Anybody know somebody that owns a primary residence that has more than $500,000 of profit? You probably do. So let's say there was $1 million in profit in my primary residence. If I sell that, well, I get to take the first 500,000 tax-free, but I'm going to owe tax on the other 500,000. No bueno. What if you moved out of that property and then rented it for a year? Is it investment property now? Sure is. Does it qualify for 1031 treatment? Sure does. But wait, did you also live in it for 2 out of the previous 5 years? Sure did. So you could sell that property then, which is an investment property, and do a 1031 exchange. But you would also take the first $500,000 of what we call boot, cash. Normally that would be taxable, but because it qualifies for the primary residence treatment, yet your accountant washes it out. So you can actually eliminate or defer $1 billion of gain on a sale of your former primary residence by doing it that way. So that's kind of a couple different tricks to the House Act. Ronnie, when you are apportioning out your property, if there's a mother-in-law apartment or an apartment over the garage or a basement apartment that you're renting that's outside of the regular walls of your living structure, then you can separate that just like you would a duplex by square footage. But if what you're doing is generating income by renting out a bedroom or 2, that's awesome, because the IRS considers your whole living area to be your primary residence. They want you to collect and report that income, but it doesn't turn that part of the property into investment. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I love house hacks. I just love.
You might have, I think you might have touched on this before, but I got a call. So if you say sell a business property, my in-laws I know have a Victorian that they're going to be selling that they use for their business, and I know my father-in-law, his dream is to buy a house somewhere near water. I know he would have to rent it out for a bit, but what's kind of the rules on then converting that to a primary residence if he wanted to, or would he always have to rent it out for a portion of the year in order to kind of keep that?
By the way, did you get the listing, Alex?
No, I didn't. They already had one, and it was commercial. I know.
I'm charging you $50 for the answer.
Right.
Now, the answer is you can convert property back and forth as long as you're able to demonstrate that your intent was to hold it for investment. So, in-laws, and by the way, you probably want to have some strong input on where they buy, right? So,
Oh yeah.
they're going to sell Victoria. They're going to go buy what might be a future retirement property. But right now, it's going to be an investment property. So their intent has to be to use it for investment. A year or two go by, and now they can say, well, we've done rentals of this thing. We really like it. We're in that time of life. We're simply going to convert it. The key is that what they're doing is they're converting a property from investment to primary residence. The way that you do it is simple. You move into it. But the conversion speaks to a mindset of what their intent was. I got to really speak around this because there's no statutory holding period, only what you can demonstrate for your intent. Now, that being said, there's a safe harbor from the IRS of 2 years, but that's not meant to be the minimum amount of time. So we have a lot of people that feel comfortable at anything more than a year. We have people that say, I bought this, I meant to do it, I'm changing my intent, so I'm going to move into it. But it's absolutely permissible. And no, they don't have to keep renting it. They're converting it from investment into their primary residence.
Very good. I also had a experience recently. I'm purchasing an 8-unit apartment complex in Indianapolis with my business partner, who's 1031ing, and that has been a bit of a hassle because we got through the process and then touching on number 5, your title requirements. So we had just formed an LLC together, and then he found out since he's on title on those ones, he couldn't then move into an entity with that's controlled by he and I. So then I got booted from our LLC. So the workaround we're doing is I'm booted from the LLC. He's still going to buy it using the LLC, and then I'm going to buy in to the LLC after the purchase for exactly half of the purchase price, which was deemed permissible. And then when we eventually sell or do a 1031 or whatever down the road, then we'll just prorate it. But the deal, he almost had to do the unthinkable and pay taxes, which he was very adamant not about doing. So I'm glad we found a workaround.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example of the use of a disregarded entity, because when 2 people form an LLC, it always has to be taxed as a partnership. So the 2 of you as that LLC would have filed a different tax return. Whereas because the property that he sold was in his name, it was reported on his own tax return. So when you got booted, that made that LLC a single member. So he doesn't file a tax return on it. The property is still reported on his personal tax return. So you get the 1031 done, and then you buy into it. Now, what's going to happen is that once you do that, now the taxpayer for that property is the LLC. So you 2 guys are stuck together at that point. So if you ever want to do a 1031, it will be the LLC that's doing it. If that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Was that your question about raw land, Alex?
Yeah, that was, and that, I guess that was also part of the reason I was asking is they were, my father-in-law was also interested about maybe, buying some land and building a house, but I was wondering if you buy 3 acres out in the wilderness, build a house on one part of it, and then, I don't know, the 2.75 acre that is still remaining is still speculative, that it'll appreciate. How you kind of traverse that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to treat that. One of the keys is that you must purchase replacement property at least equal in value to what you sold to be used for investment. So let's say they were selling for 500,000 and they were buying a tract of land for 750. They only have to use $500,000 of that land for investment purposes. They can do anything they want with the other $250,000 worth.
Gotcha. Okay, so this would be a similar situation where, like, say if it was they're selling for 500, but they buy a piece of land for 300 and are building a house on it for 200, and that was declared in their list of things, they would still have to show intent that they're going to rent it out as an income producing property
For a while,
for at least for a little while, and then before they convert it over to a primary residence, and then it's hunky dory.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's one other big bugaboo in that scenario though, and that is that you cannot exchange for improvements on property you already own. So if they wanted to do that, sell an investment property for 500 and buy land and put a building on it, they would have to do what is called a reverse exchange. As the QI, we would take title to the land before they did. And while it's titled to us, they build the house on it. Now, once the house is built on it, what's it worth? Well, if the land was 300, the house was 200, it's worth 500,000. So then they would complete their exchange, purchasing the land and house together. Reverse exchange is a little complex and pricey, but just so you know that's out there. That's the general concept, yeah.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense.
Anybody else?
Hey Dave, can you share just a general idea of what the costs are involved in a 1031 exchange, and maybe the range from like simple to more complex?
Yeah, for those of you who are on bigger buckets, we annually do a review nationwide and we post it there. I don't know if our next one is up yet or not. It's not up yet because I think nationwide it is 850? 950. So nationwide, the average for just a garden variety 1031 exchange is $950. I'm putting a shameless plug here, doggone it. If it's less than $1 million, we do them for $850. So just saying it's $150. So Alex, you could use us and still save $100 because you owe me $50. Okay, we got it there. Yeah. Okay, now a reverse exchange is going to add $5,000 to $10,000 to that because of how complex they are. And for you guys in California, how much the franchise tax board doesn't love you because they're almost routinely auditing them. So as QIs, everybody's having to build in the audit factor for the FTB. So, but yeah, $850 to $1,500, you can get a really good exchange.
Yeah, thank you.
We don't have your contact info other than the 1031 investment.
Oh,
What's it said about?
shame on me. How about that?
There you go.
Can you see it there? Am I still on screen?
Yeah, we see the screen.
Beautiful. Yeah, the 1031 Investor is an education portal that we developed specifically because we've seen such a loss of knowledge since the last crash in 2007. So we've tried to, I think I got like 30 or 40 YouTube videos on there and calculators and articles, all kinds of stuff to try and help you. Because the more you know about 1031, the more you'll be able to use it strategically. I mean, anybody can use the tool, but it's how you can use it to best fit your specific needs. And that's what's really important. So the 1031investor.com, Mike is there. You have to answer more questions.
I did have one question. Now, Alex, thank you for the share. I mean, that's where you learn. So thank you. So, but I'm concerned. Is Alex protected? I understand that for the 1031 exchange with his partner, there's a way to do it. So I get that. But I'm concerned about Alex's protection. He's putting his money in. So you're saying take your 1031 step one. Then Alex is going to protect himself. He's fully protected from his, his investments fully protected.
Yeah, that scenario he described.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the seller or the other partner is doing the 1031, and he is taking title, 200% of it. I don't think Alex is just giving him money. Alex is buying into the entity after the fact, I guess.
I'm assuming that in the initial purchase, at least for the down payment, Alex had to put some money down. So he could do that to get the purchase complete.
So Dave is correct, because we're actually now, I had put down, we had a deposit of like $7,000, and I had sent in my half, and they actually then sent it back to me because my partner had to put in, it has to be all his money, it has to be all him.
Oh.
Ownership. So they sent back my deposit. So I'm going to have no money in this deal until he owns it and then I buy into it. The one thing that we just need to figure out the language on is when I do purchase into the LLC, is just kind of writing in that if we then sold it, because now the tax basis is going to be whatever, he's moving into it from the LLC. So whereas I'm still essentially buying it at market rate. So when we need to put in language in the LLC that when we sell the property, if we don't 1031 exchange it, we basically do the proration that I will basically receive more of the profits to offset how much more taxes that I'm going to have to pay. But there'll just be a simple calculation at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the day Alex buys his interest in the LLC, he's buying an interest, and that LLC owns the property at the old basis. So he has instant profit, even if they don't make a penny. And so he's got to protect himself from that.
Okay. Good share.
Does anyone have any more questions? Because we'll be moving into breakout groups for networking soon, but I know Dave is on the East Coast, so it's around 10:30 there. So I'm not sure, Dave, if we'll just let you go, once we finish up with the questions, or if you'll be able to stick around. But go ahead and ask any questions you guys have still for Dave.
Yeah, I would just encourage you, if questions pop up later, I'll go ahead and leave. But if questions pop up later, reach out to us at the 1031 Investor. And we're happy to talk through anything with you. Anybody else?
I think everyone has a lot to think about, and for now, and then reach out in the future if something does come up.
Yeah, thanks for all
Sounds
the info,
good.
Dave. Super helpful.
You bet, guys. It was great to be here with you. And don't worry, the 49ers will have their day someday again.
Dave, thank you.
All right, take care, all.
Yeah, we'll let you go. And it was good to see you again. And big thanks to Vicky for the tech support as well and answering the questions in the chat. And we'll send the chat question answers out as well later on.
Can't do it without her. Absolutely. All right, guys.
All right, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll be moving into our breakout rounds. We have about 30 minutes before 8. So we'll try to fit in 2 rounds of networking. And let me see, we have, give me just 1 second because we have some people jumped out. So let me rearrange the group. All right. Any questions, comments before we go into breakout?
You know, at the price he quoted, I kind of regret not not paying it
Not doing it.
because he sounds like he would. Yeah, I think he would help you out in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so-
I guess I think I do with you, Rose. I think I just assumed that it was more expensive than $850 or $950 or whatever it is.
yeah.
I just go
I-
ahead, Sergi.
I was gonna say I a while back I used to, when I heard 1031 exchange, I also used to think that, you know, you're thinking usually thousands of dollars, but then once you actually realize how inexpensive it is, it makes a lot more sense. Awesome. Okay, well, let me open up the breakout groups, and we'll do 2 sessions. So in 15 minutes or so, I'll rearrange everyone, and you guys will pop up in a new group, and then we'll just shortly before 8, we'll come back out and close out today's meeting. So I will open up the rooms and see you guys there.